Welcome to Galería de la Raza's podcast. In hopes to stay connected with our folks, we are excited to launch this virtual space that will enable us to continue to pursue our mission. Born out of the legacy of cultural activism, Galería de la Raza Studio 24 was founded in 1970, dedicated to promote Chicanx Latinx art and culture. Our creative placekeeping ethos is rooted in social inclusion and justice, where community arts are central to navigating the complex intersections of urban development, social inequality, affordable housing, and the historical cultural legacies of communities of color. To implement our mission, the Galería supports Latinx artists in the visual, literary, media, and performing arts fields whose work explore new aesthetic possibilities for socially committed art.
Bienvenido al podcast de Galería de la Raza. Con la esperanza de mantenernos conectados con nuestra gente, estamos emocionados de lanzar este espacio virtual que nos permitirá continuar con nuestra misión. Nacida del legado del activismo cultural, Galería de la Raza Studio 24 fue fundado en 1970, dedicado a promover el arte y la cultura Chicanx Latinx. Nuestro espíritu de mantenimiento creativo está arraigado en la inclusión y justicia social, donde las artes comunitarias son fundamentales para navegar la compleja intersección del desarrollo urbano, la desigualdad social, la vivienda asequible y los legados histórico-culturales de las comunidades de color. Para implementar nuestra misión, la Galería apoya a los artistas latinx en los campos de las artes visuales, literarias, mediáticas y escénicas, cuyas obras exploran nuevas posibilidades estéticas para el arte socialmente comprometido.
Hello, my name is Ani Rivera. I'm the Executive Director at Galería de la Raza. I'm from the borderlands of San Diego, Tijuana, and have lived in the Bay Area since 1998. From the onset, my work has centered on supporting children, youth, and families, which led me to the community development sector. In my capacity as the Executive Director at Galería, my work explores the intersections of community development, art, and social practice with the focus on creating equitable and sustainable models whose practices center on understanding how power, access, and resources can be used in the service of justice. As a Chicana feminist, I believe in the cultivation of sisterhood in the next generation leaders. As such, I serve as a board treasurer at the Chicana Latina Foundation, whose mission is to empower Chicana Latinas in higher education through scholarship and leadership training.
My name is Yvette Diaz. I am the Curatorial Program Coordinator at Galería de la Raza. My interest in Chicanx Latinx art led me to pursue a degree in art history and ethnic studies. Later on, I applied to Galería de la Raza as an intern. Now, as Curatorial Program Coordinator, my focus is to continue Galeria's mission of creative placekeeping and community development through the arts.
Before we begin this podcast episode, we want to take time to acknowledge that the work that Galería de la Raza does sits on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We want to honor and pay respects to those ancestors, elders, and the community past, present, and future.
Antes de comenzar este episodio, queremos tomar el tiempo para reconocer que el trabajo que hace la Galería de la Raza se asienta sobre la patria ancestral inédita de los pueblos Ramaytush Ohlone, los habitantes originales de la península de San Francisco. Queremos honrar y respetar a los antepasados, los ancianos y la comunidad del pasado, del presente y del futuro. The Sanctuary City Project series has so far explored Sergio de la Torre's work, the Sanctuary City Project, in collaboration with Galería at 2205 Mission Street, by discussing the concept of sanctuary, archiving first-hand experiences through art and practice, and looking at migration through a non-homogeneous lens. In this second installation of the series, we will be speaking to two guests that are leading the way in honoring the history, culture, and contributions of the American Indian community in the Mission District of San Francisco.
Hasta ahora, el podcast Sanctuary City Project Series ha explorado el trabajo de Sergio de la Torre llamado The Sanctuary City Project, en colaboración con Galería en el edificio 2205 Mission Street. Hemos discutido el concepto de santuario, la importancia de archivar experiencias de primera mano a través del arte y el significado de entender la migración a través de un lente no homogéneo. En esa segunda instalación de la serie hablaremos con dos invitadas que luchan por honrar y reclamar la historia, la cultura y la contribución de la comunidad indígena americana en el Distrito de la Misión de San Francisco.
There are constant reminders that colonization is ongoing and continues to adversely affect Indigenous people of the Bay Area. The inequities and erasure have led to organizing efforts in the San Francisco community to establish a recognized home base for the American Indian community, one that ensures that American Indian history and contributions will not be forgotten or overwritten. Speaking on these efforts on establishing sanctuary for the American Indian community, the importance of solidarity and maintaining cultural practices, are the Executive Director of the American Indian Cultural District, Sharaya Souza, and the Executive Director of the American Indian Cultural Center, April McGill.
Tenemos constantes recordatorios que la colonización sigue en curso y continúa afectando negativamente a los pueblos indígenas, incluyendo aquí en el área de la bahía. Las desigualdades y la historia borrada han llevado a organizar esfuerzos en la comunidad de San Francisco para establecer una base de operaciones reconocida para la comunidad indígena americana, una que garantice que la historia y las contribuciones de los pueblos indígenas americanos no sean olvidadas o sobrescritas. Hoy nos acompaña la directora ejecutiva del Distrito Cultural Indígena Americano, Sharaya Souza, y la directora ejecutiva del Centro Cultural Indígena Americano, April McGill. Ellas hablarán sobre sus esfuerzos para establecer un santuario para la comunidad y pueblos indígenas americanos, la importancia de la solidaridad comunitaria y su esfuerzo para proteger y mantener prácticas culturales de sus pueblos.
Sharaya Souza, Taos Pueblo, Ute, Kiowa, is the Executive Director and co-founder for the American Indian Cultural District in San Francisco. The American Indian Cultural District is the first of its kind in California and the largest American Indian Cultural District in the United States. Sharaya helped lead cultural district efforts by drafting the legislation, working with the local American Indian community to identify a culturally significant geographic area, securing funding, and leading negotiations with local district supervisors and stakeholders.
Sharaya Souza, Taos Pueblo, Ute, en Kiowa, es la directora ejecutiva y cofundadora del Distrito Cultural Indígena Americano en San Francisco. El Distrito Cultural es el primero de su tipo en California y el Distrito Cultural Indígena Americano más grande de los Estados Unidos. Sharaya fue una de las líderes de los esfuerzos del Distrito Cultural al redactar la legislación, trabajando con la comunidad indígena americana local para identificar una área geográfica de importancia cultural, recaudando fondos y llevó a cabo las negociaciones con los supervisores de los distritos locales que determinan el mapa geográfico del Distrito Cultural y también así incluyendo al público en general.
Sharaya is an ambassador for promoting equitable resource distribution to Native American communities, increasing Native visibility and political representation, and protecting and preserving tribal cultural resources in the San Francisco Bay Area. In addition to active participation with local Native American organizations, Sharaya serves on several local city boards and groups, including Housing Policy, Planning for the People, Racial Equity in Arts, Economic Recovery Task Force, the Human Rights Commission Roundtable, and the Climate Council.
Sharaya es embajadora por promover la distribución equitativa de recursos, aumentando la visibilidad y la representación política que protege y preserva los recursos e identidades culturales tribales indígenas en el área de la Bahía de San Francisco. Además de la participación activa con organizaciones locales de comunidades indígenas americanas, Sharaya sirve en varias juntas y grupos locales de la ciudad que incluye promoviendo política de vivienda, planificación para la gente, equidad racial, Las Artes, Grupo de Trabajo de Recuperación Económica, la Mesa Redonda de la Comisión de Derechos Humanos y el Consejo Climático. April McGill, Yuki, Wapo, Little Lake, Pomo, Wailaki, is the Director of Community Partnerships and Projects for the California Consortium for Urban Indian Health. Their work includes working in women's violence prevention through the Red Women Rising Project. They are a member of the Traditions of Health Project and most currently working with Getting Real About Stigma Reduction, a hepatitis C prevention grant.
April McGill, Yuki, Wapo, Little Lake Pomo, Wailaki, es la directora de asociaciones de proyectos comunitarios del Consorcio de California para la Salud Urbana de los Indígenas. Su trabajo incluye liderar el proyecto de violencia contra las mujeres llamado Red Women Rising Project, el proyecto Tradiciones de Salud y actualmente trabaja en una beca de prevención del hepatitis C, Getting Real About Stigma Reduction.
April is the Executive Director for the American Indian Cultural Center. In her activism and community work pushing the city to give the Native community a cultural arts and wellness center, she became a co-founder of the American Indian Cultural District. She graduated from San Francisco State University in 2009 with a BA in honors with American Indian Studies. April moved to the Northwest in 2010 to work as a research assistant at Portland State University Regional Research Institute on the Systems of Care Naknuwit project for Native families receiving mental health services. While living in the Northwest, April attended Evergreen State College, where she pursued her master's degree in public administration, tribal governance in 2012.
April también es la directora ejecutiva del Centro Cultural Indígena Americano. En su activismo y trabajo comunitario, se convirtió en la cofundadora del Distrito Cultural Indígena Americano. Este trabajo incluyó presionar a la ciudad para que brinde a la comunidad indígena americano un centro de arte y bienestar cultural. Se graduó de San Francisco State University en 2009 con una licenciatura con honores en estudios indígenas americanos. April se mudó al noroeste en 2010 para trabajar como asistente de investigación en el Instituto de Investigación Regional de Portland State University sobre el sistema de atención proyecto NACNUIT para familias indígenas que reciben servicios de salud mental. Mientras vivía en el noroeste, April asistió a Evergreen State College, donde obtuvo su maestría en Administración Pública, Gobernanza Tribal en 2012.
Hi, this is April McGill, Oyawi, on behalf of the American Indian Cultural Center of San Francisco and the American Indian Cultural District of San Francisco. We would like to do our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of the land and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place, as well as for all people who reside in their traditional territory. As guests, we recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland, and we wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, relatives of the Ramaytush community, and by affirming their sovereign rights as First Peoples. And that is by Greg Castro, Jonathan Cordero, Ramaytush Ohlone relatives. Oh, Yahweh, thank you for allowing me to read that on behalf of them.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, April and Sharaya. It's really an honor to have a dialogue with you. I want to start with, as we think of sanctuary and we think of the history of the mission in San Francisco and thinking of establishing the geographical blueprint and map of the American Indian Culture District. Can you explain to us what was the process in establishing points or areas of significance for the American Indian history and culture in the Mission District? More specifically, can you speak on the recent move to include Dolores Park in the map? What informed the geographic boundaries?
For establishing, the cultural district, one of the things that we did is we actually had a group of elders, that would be Debbie and Mary Jean, and Debbie Santiago, Mary Jean, and they had been working with the American Indian community. They're elders with the American Indian Cultural Center Advisory Council, and so for a few years they had been working with the community to start mapping out significant areas within the cultural district that with not just within the cultural district, but within San Francisco, that they really thought were important to the American Indian community. So they had been doing this work for quite some time. And when myself and my sister April were approached by the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, when they were like, hey, what are your thoughts about doing a cultural district? Where do you want to do a cultural district? Our first step was to kind of turn to the community and say, hey, what are you all thinking? And really, after sitting down with our elders and looking at that map, it was kind of clear to us, obviously, there are significant, not just cultural sites to the whole American Indian community, but the Ramaytush community throughout the city. Um, but, some of the bigger movements and some of the bigger centers and some of the bigger hearts to our community were within what is now known today as the American Indian Cultural District in the Mission District. We've got Friendship House, we've got the Old American Indian Center, we had the Treaty Council, Native American Health Center. So it's always sort of been that hub. Even there was a point back in time when Native folks started coming in from relocation and after World War II for jobs. And the American Indian Cultural District was actually known as, quote unquote, the Red Ghetto at one point, because that's the heavy concentration of our Native folks and where we started gathering from. More particularly for Dolores Park, I think, me and my sister April, we'd always kind of had that in mind as being significant to our community. But at the time, because we were approached so fast to kind of get this legislation out and get this map out in a very quick turnaround in order to meet a funding deadline, we weren't able to really sit down and have those really important conversations with our Ramaytush Ohlone relatives in the way that we wanted to, and in the way that we thought was respectful to go ahead and include that. So fast forwarding to today, we actually have a Ramaytush Ohlone relative who's got quite a broad network of other Ramaytush Ohlone people in San Francisco, which is Greg Castro, the one who wrote the land acknowledgement that April read. And so we reached out to Greg, and I said, Brother Greg, I know this is a really important village site, cultural site. This is a huge thing for your people, and I know that there's also attachments to the mission era for our Ramaytush Ohlone relatives. Given we have this moment and we have this support with racial equity in the city right now, would you be okay with us protecting this site for you and taking this on, as our Ramaytush relative? And he said, absolutely. I think that this is the right time and the right move. And so, um, luckily, we were able to meet with planning in a really, really long process of what was our cultural district's actually been expanded 3 times in total. And that wasn't necessarily by us. That was, we had always wanted a larger footprint. There's just some politics and some stakeholders involved. But to do that in the respectful way. But so, anyways, we were able, the most recent time, the person from planning said, hey, you touched down to 18th Street. Why don't you guys consider the park? And so we had those conversations and we brought the park in. And I think, we're all really excited and honored to be able to call that part of our home and to hold, healing ceremonies there for our Ramaytush Ohlone relatives. So that's kind of how we came to be today, and that's how we came to grow our footprint and really be able to be honored to protect some of those sacred sites.
So I just have a follow-up question or maybe comment. It seems that you have, in the process, there was a lot of support from the city to establish this. Um, how is it sort of, is this has been a new position that you've experienced, that y'all have experienced with having the city support the policy? I mean, I find it really interesting that to reclaim what is rightfully like native lands, that it has taken this long, to really get a grounding in footwork. So, what do you think changed from beyond the community engagement from the policy perspective? Have you ever had a conversation with the folks that have been at the table around that? We're interested because I find it that as we think of our communities and we think of sanctuary, all of it is really about laws that are controlling Black, brown, Indigenous folks. It's about control of bodies and how we occupy public space. So I'm just wondering what your perspective is on that.
I was just thinking about how, you know, as Indigenous people, we think about things in a circle. So we think about this time as coming back full circle. We've seen a lot of historical moments. There's a really deep rooted history of policy when you talk about that with the Indian Child Welfare Act, with thinking about the NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection Act, lots of things that have started here in San Francisco. And we can go back again, to the occupation of Alcatraz and all of those different movements. But when we think about, say, the occupation, we think about all those other policies that happened after that. And I think that what happens is you have a generation of leaders who have maybe, you know, gotten older or stepped down from their leadership role, or say are still working in community, but maybe not so much on the political level. And so I think that throughout time, you see things happen and folks step down, or there's more focus on environmental issues, or there's more focus on Native children and families, or we're looking at HIV crisis, epidemics, and then looking at substance use. So there's always this focus on something else that's necessarily taking a priority over what really needs to happen, which is continuing to work to create visibility. So I think for American Indians, we're always having to deal with some type of crisis within our community. So there's this generational trauma that's happened. And so you see that we're continuing to have to create visibility and healing within the community. And I think right now we're in this place as we look at, say, uh, our African brothers and sisters with the Black Lives Matter movement, and we see our Latinx community coming up, and we see a lot of other people of color rising to this occasion to create a voice again and take over their communities, take their communities back again, and say, hey, this is our time too. And it's just, again, full circle about back to us again, similar to like the civil rights. And so I think for us, it's just the time right now is what we always say. It's a time for all of us to come together. It's not just, a time for American Indian. It's a time for all of us to work together. And I think that goes back to this generation that we see now of young people who are becoming these leaders.
Yeah, full circle healing. Yes.
Do y'all mind if I build on that?
Sure.
Just going back to the city part. Because I know you had asked, and I know, I wanted April because she's been here longer than I have and really been a part of that movement in the city. And I just want to reiterate, it does go back to our people, because I think your question was how that we have all this support. I want to be real transparent. We didn't always have all this support. We really, and then April's been a big part of it, has gone to a lot of city hall meetings and really voiced her opinion that we need to be made a priority. And so I think what the cultural district allowed us to do was bring amazing leaders together that have been kind of siloed and doing their thing, and bring them into one spot. And stronger together is, I guess, the one way to look at it is we got up collectively and we said, this is enough. There was a point in time where the city was not going to do the cultural district because of COVID. So they were saying, hold up, we've got more important things. And so we actually worked with our sister too at MOHCD, Julia, and she said, no, sis, like, this is $230,000 for your community that you need. This is visibility that you need. And so, no, we didn't necessarily come up and have really great city support. We had to fight, we had to call, we had to email, we had to text, we had to be like, well, if you aren't going to listen to us, then we might just go to the press with this. Well, if you're not going to honor, certain things. So it wasn't, I don't want to put it that way, that it wasn't always that we had this seamless city support, because that's not the true picture behind it. The true picture behind it is, like my sister April said, it's come full circle, and it's this time. And before this time, we were always busy taking care of our family and doing something else. And I'm grateful she trusted me to put me, allow me to be in this role and allow me to work with the community, because I feel like, given land use and given some of the background that I have, I feel like Creator kind of called us all here into this circle together to kind of honor that work. Like she said, that the people before us have been putting in, because our people have been so tired of getting crapped on. We've had a bunch of different, I don't know how to put that more politically correct, but we've had a bunch of different issues come up. We've had an agency called BEAR. We've had all these amazing American Indian movements. And then you saw a slowdown of really visibility for our people, and they had to kind of go inward, like she said, and take care of our folks. And then now we've got, we're losing our people, through abuse, through all these different things, through homelessness, through being out, migration. I think we really just had to come together and say this is enough. And so I feel like I just wanted to reiterate that back to the city point is no, it wasn't a pretty smooth process where people held our hands and made it their priority. It was really a fight. And then they kind of then this racial equity stuff happened, and they're like, okay, now we realize if we're going to start looking at how do we heal all of our brothers and sisters of color, how do we start from ground zero to the people whose land we're on and work our way up? Oh, wait, they're still here and they're going to be loud. Now we got to pay attention to them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a moment, and thank you for that. That I think that's important to note that it wasn't just sort of easy to walk into to this place, and yet what a moment to be in this place, because it seems like as a full circle. When you talk about first full circle, just last week's announcement on the new Secretary of the Interior, Representative Deb Halan, that is going to be, running public lands, and what a moment to have that type of visibility, right? Like, it's taken a lot of work. So thank you for sharing that and being, that honesty. I think it's important, as there's still so much work to be done as we move forward. Yvette.
Yeah. You mentioned, we wouldn't be here, or you all wouldn't be here without the work that has come before, in this, creating this full circle. April, maybe you can answer this question for us. Can you give a bit of the historical background on the American Indian Cultural Center, and its role in recent history for the community and the mission?
It's thank you, Ani, for acknowledging Deb Holland too, because that's like a huge win for Indian people. And again, it goes back to really getting that support and grassroots work, to create that visibility. And I think that that's what a lot of this work is for, that we're doing to create that visibility in creative ways. And and us having a cultural center, as a virtual center, is new, to have a virtual center, but a physical center, we had that before. Um, so I'm just going off of, a lot of the information I've given you is from stories, like a lot of Native people. Our history is all oral tradition. It's all through those stories. And so we've had the opportunity to meet with a lot of the elders in the community and find out about this history. And so a lot of what I'm sharing with you around, the history is from them. And so the one of the centers that they had, for the cultural center, was called the Indian Center. So we called it the Indian Center. And it was located between Mission and Valencia Street. And this center ran from the 40s to 1969. And in 1969, there was a fire that burned down the Indian Center. And with that fire created another fire, which was the Alcatraz Movement. A lot of activists, which were students from San Francisco State and Cal Berkeley, wanted to create a new Indian Center. They wanted more resources. Um, they wanted to see something for themselves again during this time, and wanted a new center, and they wanted a native school, um, and they wanted it on Alcatraz. And that's what really boosted that morale of, like, let's get this, let's get Alcatraz, we want this movement. And so from 1969 through 1971, or 1970, sorry, the Indian Center, it had an office over on 16th and Guerrero Street. And it was right in the heart of, what is now we're considering the district. And so from 1970 to 1988, the Indian Center was, like around 225, 229 Valencia Street is what the relatives have shared with us. And this location offered a wide variety of services, of programming, and resources to the community. And that space closed in 1988. And in 1990, the Indian Center, which was ICANN, Indian Center of All Nations, was located on 16th and Mission Street, and that closed in 1995 due to a lack of steady funding. And when I was meeting with relatives just really recently this week, and we were talking about um, all of the programming and space, what had happened after the fire, and what happened after ICANN, and so there's a strong history of trauma that happened because of it closing, and not having a place. As Native people, we've always been relocated, we've always been homeless, and not having land, not having a place that is actually ours. And so they shared with us, that the Soma Center, which is the Soma Art Space, which they considered Brannan Street Art Space, is what they called it. We had a lot of programming there, and we also had a lot of workshops at Mission Cultural Center. So a lot of the American Indian community was involved with the Mission Cultural Center when it first started, and they would have a lot of programming there and go back and forth to Brannan Street, which is again Soma Arts. And then also they would go to Good Samaritan, and so they would have drumming classes, language classes, and so what happened over time is that people kind of took over these spaces and they got pushed out, and so that's where you see a lot of like Native American Health Center, Friendship House, which is Friendship House is our substance abuse treatment center, and a Native American Health Center being a clinic had to provide these services to substitute, say, those community dinners, those gathering spaces for the community. And so, it's so important for us now to have this cultural center, because it gives us identity, it gives us place, and when I think about a lot of, well, just hearing these stories and talking about it, a lot comes up with, we did have support from Mayor Willie Brown. We did have support from Gavin Newsom. We had one of the most recent, which started really sparking this conversation, was Mayor Ed Lee. Mayor Ed Lee was the first one to really put it out there and say, we need an American Indian Cultural Center. We need this for the American Indian community. And he was a huge supporter of that. And then as we know, he had crossed over into the spirit world, and we lost a true advocate for us. And but with Valley Brown, past supervisor Valley Brown, she had also advocated for us as well with Mayor London Breed. So we feel that moving forward, we're having this momentum picking up of an actual physical space. And then again, most recently with the district support from Supervisor Ronan. So for the American Indian community, it's really important for them to have this cultural center, given the history of what's happened to them and the loss of their space. A lot of these people are elders, and they want to see a physical space before they die. And I mean that respectfully, but it's the truth. They say that all the time. When are we going to have our space? Everybody else has a space except us.
So, can I ask a little bit of a follow-up question to the Yvette's original question? So, there's the hope of having an actual site, and so my first question is: would you share where would you think it's the ideal, within the geographical map of what you guys have been working on? And then B, you all have been part of one of the 6 cultural districts that have been established for, as sort of the anchors of the community. So are you, this whole entire time since 95, have you guys been in the virtual position, like virtual on the go, or what is the timeline for having that like realized into a site?
Yeah, so we've been working on this for 5 years. And so the virtual center has been close to 2 years, or maybe even close to 3 years. It's gone by so quickly. Um, and so our goal is to really have a physical building. And, when we looked at the district, one of the things that was coming up in conversation with our elders were, why are we picking just the Mission? We were in the Tenderloin, we were in the Bayview, we were in South of Market. We were everywhere. And so, because of the last cultural center, American Indian Center, being in the Mission, we decided that that was where we wanted to have a possibility of our cultural center there. Also, because Native American Health Center is there, our Indian education program is there, and so all our native orgs pretty much are in that corridor. And so this year we're planning on meeting with architects to really do a design of what our building will look like, what it will cost, the square footage, and really just bringing this dream alive in more of a detailed um, just with more details, because we see that, like, we have to think about where we want this building to be. And of course we would love it in the cultural district, but it really is about land. It really is about land, and it's what's available. And we don't see the cultural center as being just one center. We see it as having multiple centers. And so yeah, that's
Right.
kind of where we're dreaming.
Awesome. That's awesome. Dream big. My recommendation after going through this process of identifying a permanent home and how the length of time and also just getting through the process of it is having multiple options. And so I love that you think about it as there are opportunities wherever we find space and make it home, right? So um and that's been the reason why we wanted to start a real like building a conversation, building a relationship with both of you, because we, in our journey of transitioning into our permanent home, realize we're relocating to an area that has a history, that has that we need to be in support of, and what does it mean to be into allyship. So when we started this conversation previously, you mentioned the importance of solidarity between cultural districts. I think it includes not just the cultural districts, but the actors who are part of it, right? So who's taking space, and why are they taking space, and what is the intention? So, with that in mind, what does solidarity to you mean? What would it, for those hearing this conversation, when they think about coming into this district, how would they sort of approach? What are the values maybe that we can think, share in this conversation, and support each other, that supports each other's work, and, build a model? What does that look like? I think this question is, for Sharaya.
Thank you. Um, Solidarity for me, at least with my experience, cultural districts are, a city tool, right, to fight gentrification. But at the same time, because they're a city tool, the way that we had to go about this process was very colonized, right? We had to draw our borders, and this is my district, and this is your district, and don't go up to that street. Why do you got to go to that street? That was part of my history. That's part of my history. So I think what solidarity means to me, and what I tell people is, you're like, how do we as actors and not just as cultural districts? And what I tell my board and my community all the time is that we're just a place on a map without you all, without the cultural center, without the people that come with the cultural center, without the work that came from the cultural center. We're just a place without any of the, health center, any of the people that are a part of our community. Without that, we're just a place on the map. So how do we as people come together, I think, and as cultural districts, really as relatives, and look at our similarities? I know some of our sisters, I'm Pueblo, and I know that there are sisters, from Calle that are also Pueblo. Maybe people identify culturally one way or the other. I think solidarity to me means looking at our sister cultural districts and saying, one, what do we have in common? 2, how can we raise each other's voice? And 3, how can I support you? With Castro, because we had to go through that kind of dirty, like, not dirty, but like, this is ours, and what do you want that for? We came together with Castro as a board and we said, how do we march down the street together? How do we put up flagpole banners that aren't territorial, that are like, hey, let's put an eagle feather here and a rainbow down there? Like, how do we come together and fight what colonization and what politics and what bullcrap does to us, and how do we come together as people and show love for each other so that we don't keep believing this narrative that this is your side of the property and this is your side of the property. And I think that's really important with our relatives from Kaya, because or our Latinx cultural districts, because I'm a ceremony person, and for me, a lot of my relatives that I sit up with, Purepecha, Michoacan, wherever they're from, where our indigenous spirit and our connection to the land is the same. So how do we start from with most indigenous people, our plants, our medicines? It's really about that connection and creator in whatever way and however you call creator. And so I think that that's a responsibility that we have to each other, is to get out of the politics, get out of, let's be honest, like April said, there's native folks and sites all over the city. Let's stop getting to the point as cultural districts where we're playing those politics with the maps, and start looking at how we can elevate each other's voice and how we can come together and love each other and care about each other, because we're all going through this with COVID right now. There isn't one community in this city that can say that they're not hurting, but there are communities that have been hurting and that are compounded by this. So how do we, I think Valerie from Valerie Tulare invited us over to, the Latin task force and said, look, this is our dream. This is what we've done. This is what you can do. Let me help you. How do you all want to do it too? So acts like that, things like that, I think are definitely key to fighting this narrative of the other and they're them and you're you that we're fed, and really just seeing each other as relatives and as people.
I really love how you said, you know, rather than fighting for, drawing lines, is approaching it through the framework of how do we march together? I mean, as communities that have been marginalized systemically over and over, that's really how we build allyship and empower, right? And shift, as you said, the colonial frameworks. That needs to be highlighted and highlighted and highlighted over and over. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I think it's important.
Can I just elaborate on that? I think
Yeah.
this city, even more than cultural districts, with our funding, and I bring this up a lot, and it's not to throw any shade on any of our relatives, but I want the visibility around it. We fought our rears off for $400,000. Our Latinx relatives fought their rears off for 20 something million, and our Black relatives fought their stuff off for 100, or fought really hard, for that 120 million of years and years of. Look at the freaking funding disparities. And then the reasons for our cultural districts and those boundaries was a lot of like political, someone promised somebody that, somebody promised somebody this. So inherently, this system is set up for to make us compare ourselves and to make us fight against each other. But luckily, in this time, we've come together with our Latinx relatives, with our Black relatives, and said, okay, how can we meet with the African American Arts Cultural District. I meet with them about every 6 weeks, and they said, how can we introduce you to people? How can we help you with your flagpole banners? So I just wanted to really put that funding disparity out there for visibility, because it's disgusting. And when we approached people about it, it was like, oh, this is a cultural equity lens. What kind of cultural equity lens is that?
Preach. This needs to be documented. I mean, and even within our own community of that $20.5 million, there's such, it's limited resources, and I'll have to share that we have a lot of work to do to also build the equity within our own frameworks that we operate. I'll share a little bit about that process. And the arts and culture received $250,000 of that $28.5 million, and we can call it lack of leadership, we can call it absence. All of it is true, and yet why aren't we as a ethos, as a community, celebrating and including art and culture as a means for survival and building the framework of decolonizing all these systems that oppress us? Especially during this pandemic, we've seen the role of art and culture support and transform and help us survive these dire times. And so somebody once told me, in communities, what they've done historically to disenfranchise them is you attack their food, their language, and their culture. And that's what keeps happening over and over again, right? And so I think it is worth noting. It's not a moment of like building a fight, but it is worth noting that even within this work that we're doing around cultural equity, where do those that most have been ignored sit? So I really appreciate that brave comment. And, I think it's important that we revisit it as we're looking also at different ways of doing work together. As us, Galería, coming into what is going to be the blueprint of the American Indian Cultural District, what does it mean for us to build with you all and to share the resources as well and build. And I think we've had a long history of that. So reconnecting with that, would be really. I really look forward to it. Yvette.
I think that's a good transition to my next question. In defending like culture and our traditions, what are some cultural practices or traditions that you honor and celebrate personally? How do these personal traditions inform the work that you do in building the cultural district or creating programming for the cultural center?
Yeah, that is a good transition into that, because it kind of goes back to um, something that Ani just said earlier, which was we've been working together. We've been doing this work together. Back in 2012, I met Estela Garcia, who just retired from Instituto. And at the time, I was working at Native American Health Center, and we had a grant called Urban Trails, and it was bringing a lot of behavioral health services to American Indian youth and families. And during that time, we created this partnership because we had a lot of families who were coming from Guatemala. They were coming from the Yucatan. They were coming into San Francisco, and they were coming to our clinic for services. They weren't going to somewhere else because there was I think it was La Clinica or one of the other ones who only spoke Spanish, but they didn't speak Spanish, and they identified as being indigenous, so they came to our clinic for services, but we had a language barrier. So we were like, wait a minute, how do we provide services to our indigenous community who are identifying as native, and yet there's a language barrier? So we partnered with Instituto and also I'm going blank on the other one that we had, Indigenous Health. I think it was with it was on 16th as well. Um, but we had partnered together, and in our youth programs we had our youth that would come to our programs, and we started building this model, which was a national model to show American Indian people working with our South and Central American folks. And so I remember presenting this at a conference from the Indian Chow, I think it was Indian Child Welfare, but we had presented this model, and it was NICWA. There it was. It was a NICWA conference, and Stella was there, and we talked about this model of how we partnered with all of these agencies within city and county, and in addition to our indigenous relatives and organizations. And so we shared this model of like how we can work together, even though there was this language barrier, because what we were really sharing was ceremony. We were sharing those traditional practices. We were doing cultural exchanges. If we didn't have a space to have one of our meetings, we would use Instituto space. And so I think that when we think about the traditions and how we celebrate our culture, um, we need to do it together more. We need to come and be in circle more. Just like when some people will say, well, we're not at the table, and people will say, an indigenous perspective is, no, you got to be a part of the circle. We're not a part of the circle, and that circle includes everybody. And I think that for us as Native people, as Indigenous people, Latinx, however we want to identify ourselves with, we have to be in ceremony more together. We need to be able to share those cultural practices because we both have so much connection to this land, especially when we think about the district, when we think about the American Indian Cultural District, and we think how it piggybacks with Calle 24, Mission, Latinx community, and also with even our are trans women who have come and said, hey, I have a spot in the mission. Can I be a part of that? Of course, because we know that history. We know it's always been there. So again, it's more about us working together and not creating those borders and letting people create those borders for us, but like really just talking about us coming together and celebrating more of those historical moments, whether it be the 50th anniversary, whether it be sunrise ceremony for on Indigenous Peoples Day, whether it be sunrise ceremony for uh, Thanksgiving on that day of memorial. I mean, there's many things, for even right now we're thinking about, winter solstice, how we both celebrate that, what it means to both of our, or to all people. And as a California Indian person, we take this time right now to we dance on New Year's Eve. That's the time we come together in ceremony, and we dance and pray for everybody so that we have a new year, a new year of blessings, a good year, a year that has no sickness, a year that is good for all of us. And so that's something that we do, and there's so many intersections of what we all do that is the same than differences. And so I think that when we have our cultural district, we really see it as more of a time for us just to be celebrating. Like we look forward to this big block party that we're going to have. So just letting you know.
Well, we hope we have an invitation because we are so ready to celebrate too. If you know the Galería stories, we love good parties. We love to dance. We feel that it's all part of the spirit, and that we want to, it's the way that we create relationships. We release energy. We honor everything, our history. So yes, let us know. Um, as as we close this conversation, I think, we understand the times that we're living in are dire. We understand that there's so much shift. We understand that, like, so I feel like I want to sort of say that in the next year, we are also going through one other major transition of coming into the permanent home and starting to build. So if we think about the next year, what are some of the priorities for the cultural district and the center that are outlined, and what is the way that we can work together? I mean, no pressure, but just what is your vision of it coming up? Like, what is that going to look like? And I say a year, not that we plan for a year, only because a year feels, this coming year feels it's going to be like we can have all the plans in the world, and then COVID's going to just, give us a reality check. And so I just, not because we shouldn't be thinking forward. I think that the districts, the centers, the way we build them, it's always thinking, I hate to say this, but putting our developer hats on, because we have to think into the 7 generations ahead, right? And so, but I think for us as we build, what can the next year offer us? And what are your priorities?
For the cultural district specifically, I think one thing that I'm really excited about and I pitch wherever I go is our Indigenize project. Couple parts. One is flagpole banners, part of that visibility. We're here. This is an important place to us. It carries those cultural traditions. Our murals are going to honor, our northern, southern, and central California Native tribes, but they're also going to have murals that are going to honor the bigger group of Indigenous folks and intertribal Native folks that exist. That includes, a lot of our danzantes and our other relatives that are in the district as well. And then the third part of that is going to be our QR scan code project, which is the part I'm all excited about all of it, but I'm most excited about this part because this is the part where we get to go talk to those elders. We get to have the youth talk. We get to identify those spots that people have known about in our district that are really important to our people, and we get to hear from them and through a Native lens on why these projects, or why this space, like that cultural center April shared with you, that burnt down. And I love how she put, a fire started another fire. That's like the quote of the call. But a lot of people don't know that, and that was an arguing point for our map, is why go up to DeBose, why go up there, because that was such an important part. Losing that center sparked that fire for people to want that space, so that we had a place to come together and keep our culture and keep our traditions, because they literally feared that if we didn't have that place, that our culture and our folks, the way that we are, would die out. So just letting people know, going around with their phone, and this isn't just for Native folks and to honor us and to be excited about us. This is a learning process for all of our relatives to really just go through, especially our, our non-Native relatives, our non-Indigenous, non-culturally in touch relatives, those that drink and party at Dolores Park, to understand what is it you're drinking and partying on. Because a lot of people don't have that understanding when they're over there doing what they're doing. Would you do that at a similar site? If you knew the significance to your own people, would you respect it in that way? So that's something that, like, I always want to put in people's head, just to be mindful and to be aware. And I think that we have that responsibility as Native folks to kind of bring that, here's to some extent, here's why it's important to us, at least to bring that visibility that our elders have been doing this work and carrying before us. So really excited about the Indigenize project. I hope a big part of that too is going to be a Rumatush Ohlone trail, which is going to probably start in Mission Dolores and have a waterfront component to it, so outside of our cultural district, to really bring visibility and honor Rumatush Ohlone people. Um, and then hopefully, and April can probably speak more to this, cultural district is working because I say that we're all one big family. We're working on hopefully securing space on the waterfront until we get that big, beautiful center that April is envisioning and dreaming of with her folks, so that we can have a home for all of our, at least the cultural center, cultural district, our Ramaytush Ohlone relatives, and whoever wants to come use that space in a safe way that they can, so that we have some sort of home in the city. Because maybe the city doesn't like it, maybe y'all don't like it, but I think that after after the gentrification and after the way that they've treated our people, I think a small space is what they owe us at minimum, especially for homeless Indians who, my brother Peter says, are homeless in our own backyard. So that's what I'm excited about.
I'm excited about all that. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that the cultural center would not be what it is without the cultural district, and the cultural district wouldn't be what it is without the cultural center. So it's really kind of one unit, is kind of how we see it, and just really expanding on the services and things that the community needs. And so with the Indigenize project, that's one of the things that we have planned to work with Cultural District on. Um, Again, educating the community about Mission Dolores and Dolores Park and what that means to the community, but also again looking at the cultural center and really looking at what that's going to look like and manifesting that, and possibly just building on that capital campaign that we need to do to get support from everybody, whether it be our native orgs, non-native orgs, foundations, tribal relatives. Here in California, we have a lot. For San Francisco, we have one of the highest populations of American Indian people. Uh, Close to 90% of American Indians live in cities such as San Francisco and Los Angeles, and we need resources for our community. And this center is so important. So, with having that population, we're an intertribal community. We have tribes from out of different states of California, so we need to bring them in to invest in this cultural center, to invest in their tribal members who live here in San Francisco, and that way we can build up on these resources that have left San Francisco, such as HIV resources, and one thing we look really forward to is creating a space for our Two Spirit community, because they too have been pushed out in many spaces, and so I look forward to just really building our community, and one of the things that I always share with Peter, who's on our board for cultural district, is we need to take back our city, take back our community, and just decolonize it, indigenize it the way that it's supposed to be, because there's so much here that we could do working together, and I just only see that growing so much more. And we've had been able to make some partnerships with our relatives in the Bayview, and and people tell us, I see you, we see you guys, like, don't forget, like, like, just know that we see you. So we know that we have a lot of support from all of our communities.
Lots, it's a tall order, right? And it just, if folks want to get involved and want to learn more about it and be in direct communication with you, where can we direct folks to be in touch? What channels, what social media channels? Plug them in right now. Let's do it.
So April runs the Indigenous project and the Cultural Center. So I think please follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. I know we're both pretty active on Facebook and Twitter. Do a phone call, email us. I think, for me, any one member, it's not just myself and the cultural district. Like I said, it's the work and the people that are here before me, and my sister April being a big part of it. So reach out to any one of the people on my board, ask them what's up, connect with them. Paloma's leading the way with Human Rights Commission, working with them on the youth stuff. My sister Morningstar is all over everywhere, anywhere and everywhere, all over California. April's all over with the youth and the cultural center, and just everywhere with her work with health. And so reach out to us, invite us to things. We'll invite you to things. I know we've been super busy lately, so we're the worst at that. But yeah, I mean, I'd say
Are you on
just check our
Instagram?
website. Huh?
Are you on
We're
Instagram or
not on
TikTok?
Instagram yet. We've only had 3 events, so we're working on building our library. But
Okay. Let us know how we can help. Definitely get those young folks involved, right?
Twitter and Facebook. Get
Well,
them on
we're
Twitter.
trying to get into TikTok. Like, it's kind of fun. We're trying to figure that out.
Oh no, there's too many.
But there's, we're an arts organization, and one of the images and works that right now is coming to mind that is always spoken so dearly to my heart, and I want to give a shout out to, is Melanie Cervantes print that is around, existing, resisting, indigenizing, and decolonizing. It's such a powerful 4 words that can allow us to really um, show up authentically and to claim all of our ancestors and to think of the future. And so I just want to really thank you as we are coming to a close, but I do have one more question. What are we not asking that you want to share? Something we're not asking. We focused on both the cultural district and the center, but I also want to know if there's something that we're not asking that you think it's important to share at this in this platform.
One of the things that people sometimes say is like, what can I do, and one of the things that I really appreciate, it was Estella always saying, "Where's American Indian?" In every single meeting that she was in with city and county, whether it be around housing, whether it be in healthcare and different funding, she would always say, "Have you talked to American Indian? Where is American Indian?" And I think that that's like one of the things that's so important for all of us to say is when we're in a circle in these meetings or Zooms and we see folks that aren't there, that we ask, hey, why isn't Africana here? Why isn't Latinx here? Why isn't, American Indian here? And that's so important. And I think that just when you're in these spaces, keep saying, where is American Indian? Because I think that people assume that we are, but we're not.
Presente, always. Sharaya?
Boy, I don't know how to top that one. That's powerful. That's a big thinker. I think I'm gonna have to, align with April on that, and just remembering to lift each other up, because I see that too often. We get caught up in our own stuff and we forget about each other, and so that's what we're not talking about. Is go back to your communities and remind them it's not the Latinx district and the Native American district. Remind them that, but first and foremost, before any of that bullcrap, are relatives, and we share a lot of the same struggles and a lot of the same invisibilities and a lot of the same problems. And so it's not us and them, it's stronger together, because if we continue that narrative of us and them and that type of stuff, then we're just, again, we're putting that colonization towards our own people, and we're reinstating those harms and that colonized mindset onto our own people. So if that's one thing we're not bringing up, we're not asking, is what can we do with each other, is remind them that there aren't 2 different communities, not to battle against each other, but to, remind them that we're relatives and relations first and foremost. And if we don't continue to behave like that, then the system will only win.
Let's march together, like you said
Hey.
earlier.
And there you go.
Theta Newbreast always says to ask yourself, am I thinking like a colonizer?
Love her.
Yeah.
That's a real thing.
And there you go, straight from the source.
So,
Thinking as a colonizer. Well, my name is Ani Rivera, and I want to thank you for tuning in to Galería de la Raza's podcast. We also want to thank our guest, Sharaya Souza and April McGill, for joining us today for this conversation. From the bottom of our hearts, we thank you for your generosity and time and building with us. If you would like to learn more about the American Indian Cultural Center or the American Indian Cultural District, you can go to their respective websites, AICCSF.org or AmericanIndianCulturalDistrict.org. Thank you.
Oh, Yahweh, thank you.
Gracias por sintonizarse al podcast de Galería de la Raza. Queremos agradecer a nuestras invitadas Sharaya Souza y April McGill por acompañarnos hoy en esta conversación. Si desea obtener más información sobre el Centro Cultural Indígena Americano o el Distrito Cultural Indígena Americano, puede visitar sus respectivos sitios de web aiCCSF.org o AmericanIndianCulturalDistrict.org.